The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart, Book 5, The Coming of the Bear. 1. Men said afterwards that the great dragon star which blazed at Ambrosius's death, and from which Uther took the royal name of Pendragon, was a baleful herald for the new reign. And indeed, at the start, everything seemed to be against Uther. It was as if the falling of Ambrosius's star was the signal for his old enemies to rise again and crowd in from the darkened edges of the land to destroy his successor. Octa, Hengist's son, and Eosa, his kinsman, counting themselves freed by Ambrosius's death from their promise to stay north of his borders, called together what force they could still muster for attack, and as the call went out, every disaffected element rose to it. Warriors greedy for land and plunder crowded over afresh from Germany. The remnants of Pesentius's Saxons joined with Gilliman's fleeing Irish, and with whatever British thought themselves passed over by the new king. Within a few weeks of Ambrosius's death, Octa, with a large army, was scouring the north like a wolf, and before the new king could come up with him, had destroyed cities and fortresses clear down from the wall of Hadrian to York. At York, Ambrosius's strong city, he found the walls in good repair, the gates shut, and the men ready to defend themselves. He dragged up what siege engines he had, and settled down to wait. He must have known that Uther would catch up with him there, but his numbers were such that he showed no fear of the British. Afterwards they reckoned he had 30,000 men. Be that as it may, when Uther came up to raise the siege, with every man he could muster, the Saxons outnumbered the British by more than 2 to 1. It was a bloody engagement, and a disastrous one. I think myself that Ambrosius's death had shaken the kingdom. For all of Uther's brilliant reputation as a soldier, he was untried as supreme commander, and it was already known that he had not his brother's calmness and judgment in the face of odds. What he lacked in wisdom, he made up for in bravery, but even that would not defeat the odds that came against him that day at York. The British broke and ran, and were saved only by the coming dusk, which at that time of year fell early. Uther, with Golorus of Cornwall, his second in command, managed to rally his remaining force near the top of the small hill called Daemon. This was steep and offered cover of a kind, cliffs and caves and thick hazel woods, but this could only be a temporary refuge from the Saxon host which triumphantly circled the base of the hill waiting for morning. It was a desperate position for the British, and called for desperate measures. Uther, grimly encamped in a cave, called his weary captains together, while the men snatched what rest they could, and with them thrashed out a plan for outwitting the huge host waiting for them at the foot of the hill. At first, nobody had much idea beyond the need to escape, but someone, I later heard that it was Gorlois, pointed out that to retreat further was merely to postpone defeat and the destruction of the new kingdom. If escape was possible, then so was attack, and this seemed feasible if the British did not wait until daylight, but used what element of surprise there was in attacking downhill out of the dark, and long before the enemy expected it. Simple tactics indeed, that the Saxons might have expected from men so desperately trapped, but Saxons are stupid fighters, and, as I have said before, lacking in discipline. It was almost certain that they would expect no move till dawn, and that they slept soundly where they had laid down that night, confident in victory, and with any luck 3 parts drunken on the stores they had taken. To do the Saxons justice, Octa had posted scouts, and there were enough awake, and they were wide enough awake. But Gorlois's plan worked, helped by a little mist which crept before dawn up from the low ground and surrounded the base of the hill like a veil. Through this, twice as large as life and in numbers altogether deceiving, the British came in a silent, stabbing rush. At the first moment, when there was light enough to see one's way across the rocks, those Saxon outposts, who were not cut down in silence, gave the alarm, but too late. Warriors rolled over, cursing, snatching their weapons up from where they lay beside them, but the British, silent no longer, swept yelling across the half-sleeping host and cut it to pieces. It was finished before noon, and Octa and Aosa taken prisoner, before winter, with the north swept clear of Saxons, and the burned longboats smoking quietly at the northern beach on the northern beaches. Uther was back in London with his prisoners behind bars, making ready for his coronation the following spring. His battle with the Saxons, his near defeat and subsequent sharp, brilliant victory, was all that the reign needed. Men forbade the bale of Ambrosius's death. Men forgot the bale of Ambrosius's death, and talked of the new king like a sun rising. His name was on everyone's lips, from the nobles and warriors who crowded round him for gifts and honours, to the workmen building his palaces, and ladies of his court flaunting new dresses like a field of poppies in a colour called Pendragon red. I saw him only once during these first weeks. I was at Amesbury still, superintending the work of raising the Giant's Dance. Tremorinus was in the north, but I had a good team, and after their experience with the King's Stone at Kildare, the men were eager to tackle the massive stones of the dance. For the rising of the uprights, once we had alighted the stones, dug the pits, and sunk the guides, there was nothing that could be done with rope and sheer logs and plumb line. It was with the great lintels that the difficulty lay, but the miracle of the building of the dance had been done countless years before by the old craftsmen who had shaped those gigantic stones to fit as surely one into the other as wood dovetailed by a master carpenter. We had only to find means to lift them. It was this which had exercised me all those years since I first saw the capped stones in Les Britain and began my calculations. Nor had I forgotten what I had learned from the songs. In the end, I had designed a wooden crib of a kind which a modern engineer might have dismissed as primitive, but which, as the singer had been my witness, had done the task before and would again. It was a slow business, but it worked, and I suppose it was a marvelous enough sight to see those vast blocks rising stage by stage and settling finally into their beds as smoothly as if they had been made of tallow. It took 200 men to each stone as it was moved, drilled teams who worked by numbers and who kept up their rhythms as rowers do by music. The rhythms of the movement were of course laid down by the work, and the tunes were old tunes that I remembered from my childhood. My nurse had sung them to me, but she never sang the words that the men sometimes said to them. They tended to be lively, indecent, and intensely personal, and mostly concerning those in high places. Neither Uther nor I was spared, though the songs were never sung deliberately in my hearing. Moreover, when outsiders were present, the words were either correct or indistinguishable. I heard it said, long afterwards, that I moved the stones of the dance with magic and with music. I suppose you might say that both are true. I have thought since that this must have been how the story started, that Phoebus Apollo built with music the walls of Troy, but the magic and the music that moved the giant's dance I shared with the blind singer of Carrick. Towards the middle of November the frosts were sharp and the work was finished. The last campfire was put out, and the last wagon train of men and materials rolled away south back to Sarum. Cadel had gone ahead of me to Almesbury. I lingered, holding my fidgeting horse until the wagons had rolled out of sight over the edge of the plain and I was alone. The sky hung over the silent plain like a pewter bowl. It was still early in the day, and the grass was white with frost. The thin winter sun painted long shadows from the linked stones. I remembered the standing stone, and the white frost, the bull and the blood, and the smiling young god with the fair hair. I looked down at the stone. They had buried him, I knew, with his sword in his hand. And I said to him, "We shall come back, both of us, at the winter solstice." Then I left him and mounted my horse and rode toward Amesbury. And that is the end of chapter 1.